Hi, my name is Jackson Poole. I'm a sinner saved by grace. Step 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves.
When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" And he said to him,
Yes, Lord, you know that I love you.
and Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." A second time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And he said to him,
Yes, Lord, you know that I love you.
Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Peter felt hurt because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him,
Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you.
Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt to go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go." He said this to indicate the kind of death by which he would glorify God. After this, he said to him, "Follow me." This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
We're going to remedy that in a second. Life lesson: batteries are needed for a mic pack to work, and I forgot to check that. Yeah. This is just a lesson for the sermon. This was all planned. Thank you. Good morning. For those of you who I don't know, my name is Jeremy, and I'm one of the pastors here at TCC. And as Pastor Shauna mentioned a few minutes ago, we've been going through this series entitled Breathing Underwater, a talk through this journey through the 12 steps and about how they intersect with our Christian life, and especially how this isn't just about those who may be facing a journey of substance addiction and recovery, but this is something that applies to all of us because all of us face brokenness in our lives. All of us are seeking to become more like Christ. And so this week we're in step 4. You just heard it read, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. In the previous 3 weeks, as we've run up to this, the way that you could sum it up is step 1, I can't. God can. I think I'll let God. So we've talked through those first 3 steps, and then today we come to this pivot of moving towards action based on this change in our thinking in order to establish freedom and serenity in our lives. So when we say made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves, the Life Recovery Bible, which is a recovery program that Pastor Steve has introduced to our church that we use, they define it this way. They say when a business takes an inventory, it takes stock of what supplies and merchandise are there. Making an inventory shows us what is necessary, what is surplus, what is useless, and what is a liability. Our lives are like a business, and as such, we must take stock of our abilities, qualities, traits, both good and bad. In order to stay clean and sober and develop spiritually and emotionally, we must face even our worst secrets. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't start by saying this to some of us this morning, that this is not about heaping up guilt and judgment on ourselves. Because some of us, maybe some of us in this room, some of us online, have faced more than enough legalistic, guilt-based judgment in our lives. The goal here about making a searching and fearless moral inventory is not about paralysis by analysis. The goal is to become more real and honest with people who are in relationship with us, to become more like Christ as we draw closer to Christ. But this is not an easy step. If you've been here over the last few weeks, you'll remember in week 1, Pastor Sean has said, and I quote, "Step 4 is the step I'm really not looking forward to." Guess who's not preaching the step today? But this deep work of looking at our lives, past and present, it's not easy and it's not fun. Richard Rohr put it this way. He said, yes, the truth will set you free, as Jesus says in John chapter 8, but first, it tends to make you miserable. To help us frame this 4th step about this moral inventory, we're going to walk through this story that we just heard read from John chapter 21. And now for me, anytime that I read in Scripture, especially in the Gospels, for those college students and young adults who are in my Sunday school class, the community, you know that I do this a lot. I love putting myself in the story to kind of look around and try to experience what were those who were in this story experiencing, thinking, and feeling. So today I'm going to ask you to engage with me in a little sanctified imagination, a little holy creativity as we walk through this story. So in John chapter 21, verses 15 through 19, we have this conversation between Jesus and Peter. But let's back up a little bit. In the preceding verses, talk about what just happened. So we're on the other side of Easter. Jesus has died. He's come back to life. And now he's doing this weird thing where he's just like popping up random places, kind of like scaring the disciples every once in a while, walking through walls and stuff. And so they're completely disoriented. They don't know what's going They don't know what's going on. They thought he was the Messiah that was going to bring in this coming political or military kingdom, and that didn't happen, and he was dead, but now he's not dead. And they did what so many of us do when life upends itself. We go to what we know, what we can control, what feels comfortable. So these fishermen went back to fishing. And they went fishing, we're told, overnight, which in that area, that was the best time to do fishing, and they didn't catch anything. And we're told that at dawn, that this man from the beach yells out and tells them to put out the nets onto the other side. Which if you were up all night doing a job, probably the first thing you wanted to hear in the morning was someone telling you how to do your job. But in the midst of any maybe frustration in that, they did that and it immediately filled up with fish, we're told. And then it clicked for the disciples. Because they'd seen this before. When several of them, back when they were first called by Jesus, same thing happened. Stayed up overnight, did the job that they always did. No fish came in. And then in the morning at sunlight, when it was not a good time to do fishing, Jesus tells them to put out the net on the other side and it fills up the net with fish. And so the disciples immediately realize that's not just any man on the beach over there. That's Jesus. And Peter, he did what often Peter or I would do. You act and then you think about it. He just jumps in and he maybe not runs to the beach. He swims to the beach. He kind of does that awkward, waiting as you're trying to get in from the water onto the beach to get to Jesus. Leaving behind all of his friends and colleagues who are having to deal with this boat and all of this fish in the net, let them take care of that. He needs to get to Jesus. And then he does. They eventually catch up and they have this breakfast, we're told, that of bread and of fish. And there is when this conversation happens. And so we're not told, maybe they walked away from where they had breakfast, or maybe it happened what normally happens when you have a big meal with friends or with family members. You've had this happen at holidays maybe, where as you're gathered around the table, everyone finishes up, they slowly start just kind of like to go their way. Some to go take naps, some to go watch television, some to go watch birds in the backyard or hang out with kids in the front yard. And so maybe some of these disciples, they go take care of the fish and the net and the boat, because we know Peter's not going to help with that. Maybe other ones, they go for a walk. Other ones, maybe, they were up all night, worked real hard, and now the sun's starting to rise, it's getting warmer, they're on the beach, and maybe they take a nap. So regardless of where this happens, but maybe it's around this fire, that Jesus and Peter have this conversation. And Jesus asks Peter the question, "Do you love me?" And I can't help but imagine that he was snapped back in time to the first time that he met Jesus. When Jesus called him, because here's the thing, the first time that he met Jesus, his brother, Andrew, came and grabbed Peter by the hand and said, "We found the Messiah, you have to come see him." And for most of us, online and here in this room, we have a relationship with Jesus because of somebody else. Somebody who either metaphorically or maybe literally took us by the hand and said, I've found the Messiah, the one who brings new life, the one who can fix what is broken in our lives and in our world. And so Peter went with Andrew. And here's the thing, his name wasn't even Peter yet, because we're told then in this first interaction with Jesus, Jesus says, you've been called Simon, I'm going to call you Peter. Which if it wasn't Jesus, would seem a little pretentious. That the first time you meet somebody, they give you a new name. Saying, not saying your parents are off base here, but I've got a better name for you. And he names him Peter. Like, okay, you seem more like a rock kind of guy. Petra, like rock. Like, we're going to go with Peter here. And so when Jesus asks Peter that first question, do you love me? I think it's easy to think that for Peter, he goes, I gave up everything for you. Jesus, you know that I love you. I walked away from maybe not a great job, but a stable one that I'm decently good at. I even let you rename me. Jesus, you know that I love you. And then Jesus says, feed my sheep. And I think one of the important things to be reminded of in the story of Peter's calling was it wasn't just giving him a new name, but it was helping base and center Peter's identity. Because for Peter, as for us, understanding who we are, who God sees us to be, and how we are in the world, not just who am I, but like how am I doing, is are important questions for us to wrestle with in life. A few weeks ago, I was getting coffee with a friend of mine named Adam Bizard. Several of you know him, or you know his wife, Dr. Allison Bizard, who's a social work professor at the university at Trevecca. And I was sitting down for coffee with Adam, and he was telling me he works for a nonprofit called Operation Andrew Group, and they partnered with Barna Research. It's a national Christian organization that does really big research projects, and they had done one on the state of Nashville. Big sample size, talking to people in Nashville to ask the question, how are we doing? And the way that Adam summed it up was, he said, we're not doing great. We're not okay. You can find all of their research online, but I've got two graphs that I want to highlight from that. You might be able to read some of it. So this is about mental and emotional well-being. And really small, it says percentage who feel this at least once or twice a month. So when talking to people in Nashville, 56% of adults in Nashville said that they'd experienced burnout once or twice a month, and it only dropped to 54% for churched adults. And then if you look at the bottom left, the question about stress in our lives, 77% of all Nashville adults, 73% of churched adults said they've felt stressed at least once or twice a month. And it's almost 90% for those in Gen Z and millennials. Which means that if you don't feel like you're facing any obstacles in life when it comes to mental and emotional well-being, I would maybe encourage you to make a searching and moral inventory of yourself and ask if that truly is the case. And if at the end of that you still feel that way, then what is true is you are surrounded in this room and in your life by people who are not okay. 77%, 7 out of 10 is saying life's not great. And then the second slide is this. When asked the question if they've personally experienced trauma in their life, people in Nashville have said 44% said yes, compared to the national average of 28%. We're not okay. But I don't know if this is news for you. You think about what's happened in the last few years. Our family's been here almost 4 years now and been a part of Nashville, a part of the TCC family. We've had floods, tornadoes, a global pandemic, derecho straight-lined winds, more floods, a Christmas Day bombing, and a shooting in a school just a few minutes from here. Of course we're not okay. And that's not even taking into account all the stuff that's happened on a global level. Shall not want. Step one is saying that I can't, that I'm powerless to control or fix everything. And yet we are loved children of God. We're not okay, and we are loved children of God. That was true for Peter. He didn't have everything figured out. And the same is true for us today as well, that our identity is, maybe we're not okay, but in the midst of that truth, we are loved children of God. So back to this fire pit conversation between Jesus and Peter. I don't know, it doesn't tell us how long between the first and the second question. Maybe it was a few seconds. Maybe it was 4 or 5 minutes. You know, there's conversations where there's like a lull and just like this pause. I don't know. If there's one thing that I feel like I've learned about Jesus throughout my life, and especially reading in the Gospels, is it seems like Jesus leaned into the awkward a lot. So I could very easily imagine Jesus just sitting there, letting Peter maybe stew in this a little bit. Because here's the thing. Peter, he's been around Jesus a lot, right? And he's seen Jesus ask a question knowing that it's like leading in a different direction. Maybe you had a high school teacher or a college professor, maybe you are the college professor that does this, where you ask a question and you're actually aiming at a different answer to make a point that is not immediately evident. So Peter's trying to figure out where Jesus is going with this. Like, where's the hook punch coming in on this? Where's he going with this? And whether it was 2 seconds or 4 minutes, then Jesus incredulously asks the same question. Peter, do you love me? And I can't help but wonder if when he asked that question, he is again snapped back in time to a conversation with Jesus that didn't happen next to a fire, next to the lake, with the smells of salt water and sand and fish guts and maybe the sounds of disciples snoring and the waves lapping and the birds singing. No, this was a conversation between Jesus and Peter that happened not on the side of the lake, but in the middle of the lake, in the midst of a storm. We're told in Matthew 14 that Jesus, after feeding the 5,000, he sends his disciples on a boat across the lake. They get stuck in a storm in the middle of the lake, and unbelievably, Jesus walks up next to them. Peter gets out of the boat and starts to walk to Jesus. And for those of us who know that story well, know that he began to sink, and it is all too easy for us to just highlight the fact that Peter didn't have enough faith. But Peter was the only one that got out of the boat. The trouble began when he lost sight, when his vision got blurred by all of the chaos of that moment, of the storms and of the waves, of the crashing lightning and the roaring thunder. He lost sight of Jesus, and that's when he began to sink. Jesus grabbed him by the hand and saved him, right? So when Jesus asked him that question a second time, perhaps Peter's asking, did he hear me wrong? Does he not believe me? Jesus, I got out of a boat for you. I may not have been able to walk on the water, but I tried. Jesus, you know that I love you. To which Jesus said again, feed my sheep. And for us, it is easy in life to get our vision blurred. As we're talking through these 12 steps, the first few of these, again, being reminded that we are powerless, that God can, and that we need to allow God to work, but to come to terms with the fact that we can't fix something, that we can allow something to be healed, to be mended, and to be made new until we are able to identify it. To the degree that I know mathematics, which is not much, one of the beautiful truths I think that we can be reminded of from math is that you can't come to the right solution until you properly understand the problem. Right? I ran into this all the time in pre-cal in high school. Got the wrong answer because I didn't understand the question. And in life, we have to be able to properly understand what is broken in our lives, to be able to identify it, to have clear vision. Jesus says elsewhere in the Gospels that we need to get the log out of our own eye before we call out anybody else for the speck in theirs. And that log, it's not just what I've done wrong in my life, though that is in part, but also the brokenness that I've experienced through the actions of others, through the inactions of others, through the brokenness and the injustices of systems and people in our lives that we need to be able to see clearly before we can move forward. To make a searching and fearless moral inventory is to come to terms with who we are, understanding we're not okay, understanding that yet in the midst of that we are loved deeply by God, and having a clear vision for where we are in life today. So Jesus has asked this question 2 times. And then he asks Peter the exact same question a 3rd time. And I can't help but wonder if when he asked him that question a 3rd time and said, do you love me? That all the dots started to get connected for Peter. Because here's the thing, this wasn't the first time in recent memory he had been asked the same question 3 times, right? On the night that Jesus was betrayed by a friend, by a colleague of theirs, on the night that Jesus was betrayed and killed on a cross, Peter had denied Jesus 3 times. Peter had said 3 times no to the question of, do you know this man? Are you associated with this man? The same night that just a few hours earlier gathered around a Passover meal, what we now call communion, the Last Supper, in that meal where Peter said, Jesus, I will die for you, we find out later that evening that that's not the case. Maybe he's willing to kill for him, but he's not ready to die for him. Like he's willing to cut off an ear, but he said no 3 times. And I can't help but wonder what that bundle of emotions was for Peter when he heard that third question of shame, of guilt. Maybe that's why he jumped out of the boat. I don't know. I feel like sometimes, like Peter, where like if I've really messed up, then you try to go overboard. I didn't mean that as like a pun. You go overboard to try to make it up to somebody. That just happened. But like is that why he ran to the beach to Jesus? Because he didn't know what the relationship was. He needed to talk to Jesus to define the relationship talk. But I also believe this, that Jesus didn't need to hear him say, I love you 3 times in order for Jesus to know that. For him to believe that it's for real this time, to come to forgive Peter. I think maybe Peter needed to hear it 3 times, to hear it come out of his mouth 3 times, because I think it would be a fair conclusion to assume that he was questioning his commitment and his love for Jesus. He had denied him 3 times. When stuff got hard, he fled. And maybe for Peter, maybe for some of us this morning, the good news is that we're never too far from the love of Jesus. We can never separate ourselves beyond the loving embrace of our Father. And I think that's maybe why Peter needed to have this conversation, to hear it 3 times, for him to face the brokenness in his life and those actions that he made in those hours leading up to Jesus' crucifixion. Because here's the thing, he needed to heal this relationship. We know the rest of the early church story in the book of Acts. Peter plays a big part in that. He needed to know that he needed to have confirmed how deeply he did love Jesus, how deeply Jesus loved him back, and that Jesus forgave him. In order to move forward in life, we need to identify and then to address in the later of the 12 steps, and we'll get there in subsequent weeks. But we need to first identify our pride, our fear, our liabilities, selfishness, said by Celebrate Recovery, our hurts, habits, and hang-ups. And in this Christian journey of holiness, we have to come face to face with what the Life Recovery Workbook terms our worst secrets. To make a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves consists of examining people, institutions, situations, and events of our lives that have caused us pain and resentment. And we assess our part in them. We do not excuse others of their wrongs, but we see our side of the street. An inventory is the beginning of a lifelong practice of self-examination that leads us out of addiction and into relationship with God. So a next step out of this message as we move forward in this series is to take time to put pen to paper, to write down the people, institutions, situations, and events of our lives that have caused us pain and resentment, and to process through our part in them. I mean, I think on the whole, developing a spiritual practice of daily or weekly journaling to write about the events of the day or the week, the highs and the lows, is a good practice for us to process life on an ongoing basis. And these are not only reflections and conversations that we need to have by ourselves. If you'd like some more tools and resources on books to read, studies to go through, peer support groups, or professional clinical support, we have a document that looks like this. It's a 1-page resource guide that is out at the welcome desk that has a bunch of that listed. Things like our Tuesday night grief share here at TCC, or Wednesdays at our Let's Talk here at TCC. It is a great resource that our friend, Pastor Rebecca Bailey, has put together as a part of this series to help you take some next steps to make a searching and fearless moral inventory in your life. Self-examination, making a moral inventory is hard, isn't it? It's not an easy endeavor. And that's the hard truth about life that this fourth step reminds us of, that the darkest valleys are often where new life and new beginnings are. In Psalm 23, the psalmist writes, I'm going to read the first 4 verses here. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. Translated another way, waters of rest. He restores my soul. He leads me in right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil. For you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. For a large portion of my life, when I would hear this beautiful psalm, I'd kind of create this dichotomy in my mind, that there's these calm waters, this green pastures, and then there's this darkest valley, sometimes translated the valley of the shadow of death. And that they're like in opposition to each other, one good, one bad. But here's the thing. Now, I have never summited a mountain, but I've watched National Geographic a few times, and so I know a few things. I'm an expert. That mountains have something called tree lines, right, where vegetation does not grow above. Also, if there is water on the side of a mountain, it is a rushing river or a waterfall moving downhill. So calm waters and green pastures are not on the mountaintops. Where are they at? In the valley. We sang it a few minutes ago, didn't we? In the valley is where the green pastures and the calm waters are. The same place where we call it the darkest valley. When we talk about making a searching and fearless moral inventory, that is not the end of the journey. As I mentioned at the beginning, but I think it deserves being reminded again here, it is not about stewing in shame, guilt. It is a necessary part of the journey to new life, to wholeness, to holiness. That maybe we have to go through the darkest valleys sometimes to get to the green pastures and the calm waters. Several years ago, Rita and I had the opportunity to go to western Colorado in a town called Montrose. And near Montrose is something called the Black Canyon. It's as deep as the Grand Canyon, but it's not nearly as wide. And because it's not as wide, sunlight struggles to get down into the valley. And because it is a dark valley, they call it the Black Canyon. And I've been told by friends, I've never been to the Holy Land yet, but that there is geography like this in the Holy Land, where the valleys are so deep and the sunlight can't get there, that is like it was an unsafe place to go during the life of Jesus and much of the writing of the Bible. But that's also where the fresh and calm waters are. It's where the vegetation is. It's where the animals go. That maybe, in order to get to the still waters and the green pastures, means to walk through the darkest valley. And as we're reminded in this psalm, we don't do that alone. We do it with the Good Shepherd. There's another metaphor I heard several years ago about the difference between cows and buffaloes. I'm making a lot of examples from stuff that I know nothing about as a city boy this morning. Beyond the obvious differences between cows and buffaloes. When a thunderstorm rolls in, cows will do kind of the knee-jerk reaction where they will run away from the storm. And if you know anything about cows, they don't run fast. And the storm catches up to them, and they end up running with the storm, spending more time in the storm than if they had even just stood still. Buffaloes, on the other hand, when a storm rolls in, they turn and face the storm, and they run towards it. It is a much more abrupt entrance into the storm, but they get through it much quicker as well. Said differently in the Serenity Prayer, accepting hardship as the pathway to peace. Because here's the thing, we've all faced brokenness in our lives, from our actions and the actions of others, our inactions and the inactions of others. But God calls us, invites us to healing and to wholeness. Because the evil that we've faced in the world is not created by God. It's a perversion of his good creation. We have a God who walks with us through the darkest valleys. So when we say accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, it's not, that we're okay with the bad stuff in life. No, but we have to come to terms with it in order to come to peace with our lives in the world around us. We have to be able to face the storm. We have to be able, not by ourselves, as Pastor Steve reminds us, this is not a me journey, this is a we journey, to go to the valley. Because on the other side of the darkest valley is the calm waters and the green grass. On the other side of death is where resurrection is. On the other side of the storm is where peace is. And so for us this morning, our challenge is to make a searching and fearless moral inventory, to take time to wrestle with all that life is giving us right now and that we've faced in the past. To be able to know where you're going, you have to know who you are, where you are, and where you've been. An inventory of our present and our past is necessary to move forward into a future of recovery, a future of healing, a future of wholeness, and a future of holiness. I can't think of a better way to begin that journey of self-examination, of moral inventory, than to do so in prayer. And so, Pastor Shauna, would you lead us in a time of prayer this morning?